It was supposed to be an ordinary road trip, a long stretch of highway cutting through the vast, desolate Arizona desert. For Jenna Thompson, the sun-blistered landscape brought memories of freedom. She was heading to the small town of Ridgeway, a place she had visited countless times as a child. Following close behind on his motorcycle was her boyfriend, Mark. They'd agreed on the routinophones, no distractions, just the road ahead. If they got separated, they'd meet at the town diner. The heat rippled off the pavement. Jenna's dark hair was tied up, and the air conditioning in her old sedan sputtered in protest. But the endless sky and the fading orange sun kept her spirits high. That was until she noticed the pale blue Volkswagen Beetle in her rearview mirror. At first, it seemed innocent enough. The car trailed behind for miles, never passing. Then, it pulled alongside her. She glanced over, expecting a friendly wave, but instead, the driver, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, frantically motioned for her to pull over. He was shouting something, though she couldn't hear the words over the hum of the road. Her heartbeat quickened. Was there something wrong with her car? The Beetle sped up, overtaking her, then slowed until it was beside her again. The man's pale blue eyes locked onto hers. He pointed toward her front tire, mouthing words she still couldn't decipher. Jenna's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Mark wasn't far behind. She knew that, but the man's urgent gestures unsettled her. The next time he motioned, he pointed toward a dilapidated gas station just off the road. The station was a forgotten relic. Its rusted pumps stood like skeletal remains, and the cracked sign barely clung to the rusted pole above. A boarded-up convenience store sat in the background, its windows darkened and splintered. Against every instinct, Jenna pulled into the gravel lot. The Beetle followed. The man was out of his car before she even had a chance to roll down her window. "Miss, your headlight. It's loose, could fall right off," he barked, his voice trembling. Jenna's unease grew. The headlight? She hadn't noticed anything wrong. But the man insisted, his face contorted with concern. "Just step out for a second," he urged. "I'll show you." She hovered in her seat, torn. The desert air seemed heavier now, thick with the hum of insects and an unsettling stillness. Finally, she unlocked the door and slid out, the grit of the gravel crunching beneath her feet. The man moved closer. Too close. "Right here," he said, circling to the front of her car. "Come see." But as Jenna hesitated, a distant roar broke the silence. The growl of a motorcycle. "Mark." Relief flooded her chest. The man's face changed instantly. Without a word, he spun around, sprinted to his Beetle, and slammed the door. Tires screeched against the gravel as he sped away, vanishing down the lonely highway. Mark pulled up beside her, dust swirling in his wake. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. I don't know," Jenna whispered, her hands trembling. She glanced at her car's front end. The headlights were perfectly fine. They didn't linger. The gas station loomed behind them, its presence ominous. As they drove away, Jenna stole one last look in the rearview mirror. The boarded-up windows, the cracked sign, and in the darkness of the shattered glass, a pair of pale blue eyes watched them go. The town of Willow Ridge had always been quiet. Nestled among golden fields and winding back roads, it was the sort of place where people left their doors unlocked, and neighbors knew one another by name. But on one unseasonably cold morning, everything changed. It was a Tuesday when the man arrived. The third-grade class at Willow Ridge Elementary was in the middle of their spelling lesson, the squeak of chalk punctuating the air. Miss Keller, their teacher, had just asked the children to spell the word family when the classroom door burst open. The man was gaunt, his eyes hollow. Blood smeared the front of his worn jacket. No one knew his name, not yet. But the fear that radiated from him was undeniable. "Where's my son?" he growled, his voice raw and trembling. The children froze. Miss Keller instinctively moved in front of her students, her hands trembling. The man clutched a long, rusted knife, its blade catching the pale light from the classroom windows. He demanded to see his child, but the boy wasn't there. Within minutes, the principal, Mr. Franklin, appeared at the door. Behind him, the school secretary whispered in shaky tones into the phone, calling the police. But the town was small, and the nearest squad car was still miles away. "He's not here," Mr. Franklin said carefully. "Let's talk." The man didn't believe him. He screamed accusations, insisting that they were hiding his son. When Miss Keller tried to calm him, he lashed out, overturning desks and throwing books to the floor. The children sobbed, clutching each other, their innocence shattered. The gym teacher, Mr. Lewis, attempted to intervene. He stepped forward, his hands raised. "Let the kids go," he pleaded. "You don't have to do this." But the man was far beyond reason. With terrifying speed, he seized Mr. Lewis, forcing him to the ground. The knife gleamed as it pressed against the teacher's neck. Moments later, the man dragged Mrs. Parsons, a kind elderly volunteer, into the room. The knife hovered at her throat as she sobbed in fear. "Nobody moves," the man spat, "or she dies." The next 30 minutes passed in a haze. He screamed about the end of the world, about salvation through death. He told them he was saving his loved ones from the horrors to come. Every second felt like an eternity. But then, the principal made a final, desperate offer. "Take my car," Mr. Franklin said. "It's parked out front. Just go." For reasons no one would ever understand, the man agreed. He released Mrs. Parsons and left Mr. Lewis tied and gasping on the floor. Without a glance back, he sprinted out of the school, keys in hand. The police caught him hours later, just across the state line in Indiana. He was on his way to his parents' house. He told them he needed to spare them too. Willow Ridge never truly recovered. The school downplayed the incident, claiming it was a misunderstanding. No counselors came, no apologies were given. The children were left to navigate the nightmares on their own. Miss Keller quit by the end of the year. Mr. Lewis never returned. He couldn't stand the sight of the school without trembling. And Mrs. Parsons? Every time she passed one of the children in town, the memories would resurface. She'd break down in tears, the fear etched permanently into her eyes. Decades passed. Some of the children grew up and moved away, trying to forget. Others stayed, bearing the weight of unspoken trauma. They learned to live with the lingering unease, the silent echo of that day. The day the world ended, just a little, in Willow Ridge.
Ethan wasn't like the other kids. Quiet, withdrawn, always sitting alone at the farthest table in the cafeteria. His hair hung low, obscuring his eyes, and his tattered leather jacket seemed to cling to him like a second skin. The rumors said he was cursed. Not just the usual high school gossip, these stories ran deeper. They said Ethan could hear things others couldn't, see things no one else dared to. But the most unsettling tale was the one about his name. Whisper it 3 times, they said, and Ethan would appear. It started as a joke. A group of students, emboldened by the usual teenage bravado, dared one another to speak his name. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. Laughter followed, but it stopped when someone noticed him standing by the courtyard fence. No one had seen him approach. He was simply there. His eyes, shadowed beneath his hood, stared unblinking. The laughter died, replaced by an uneasy silence. Leah, the girl who had spoken his name last, swore that Ethan's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. That night, a storm raged. Leah and her friends were huddled in a dimly lit living room, retelling the day's events between fits of nervous laughter. Then, with a defiant grin, Leah did it again. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. The room darkened. The power had gone out, plunging them into silence. A flash of lightning lit the window, and for a split second they saw him, Ethan, standing beneath the pouring rain, eyes locked on Leah's. His mouth moved, but no words came, just the rain pounding against the glass. The girls screamed. The lights flickered back on, but the window was empty. There was no sign of him, but Leah knew what she had seen. Days passed, and Ethan was nowhere to be found. The teachers said he had transferred, but whispers filled the halls. Some claimed he was still watching. Leah's friends distanced themselves, but Leah wasn't so lucky. The nightmares began her eyes staring through her window. The sound of dripping water, though her room was dry. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she called out, "Ethan." No response. "Ethan, Ethan. The shadows in her room seemed to shift. A creak from the corner, and then the unmistakable sound of breathing. The next morning, Leah was gone. Her bed was empty. Her phone left buzzing with unanswered calls. The door had been locked from the inside. The only clue was a name scratched into the wall. Ethan. And still, the story lives on. Some say if you speak his name 3 times, he'll find you. Others say he's always watching, waiting for the next fool to call him forth. But whatever you believe, just remember, some names are better left unspoken.
Like, subscribe and comment.